Hi, my name is Morgan, and this is my final project. So as we've gone through this semester, I was drawn to the fact that there's an increased risk for child maltreatment for children who have chronic disabilities and health problems. I really wanted to get to the bottom of that, figure out why that is, and see if there's a solution to that problem. So a research article I found stated that the victimization rate for children in the US in 2009 was about 9.3 out of every 1,000 children. That makes for about 700,000 children who were abused in 2009. And that's only the children who were actually identified by social services, not to mention those who actually go unreported. And then they stated that 11% of those children had a chronic disability or health problem, whether that had been cognitive, physical, or behavioral, or a combination of those. And it's likely that that 11% is actually higher than the one that they found. So why is there an increased risk? I remember talking about the risk factors for child abuse in class, and it really stood out to me that the book mentioned that children with disabilities may wear down parental patience, making the child more vulnerable to abuse. Another thing was that health problems can cause a child to become irrational, nervous, or hyper-aggressive, among other things. And that can really wear down those parental patience even more and stressing them out even more, making them more likely to lash out. Another thing that I found really interesting was that when children gain a cognitive challenge later in their childhood, a parent may be unaware of this challenge, and they may just think that their child's acting out, causing them to stress out and maybe lash out against their child, or they may just not be able to fully understand what their child is going through, so they don't really know how to help them, stressing them out even more. So the study I found in my research aimed to identify the common themes found as risk factors for abuse of children with chronic health problems, and they wanted to explain how those came about. So the research method consisted of in-depth interviews of the parents, and the parents were selected through staff members at a childhood and adolescent habilitation unit and a psychological service unit that deals with chronic health problems. Some of the major themes that the researchers found as risk factors were the emotional demands between the parent and the child, the shift in responsibility from the professional to the parent for things like support and services, the emotionally closed environments between the professional and the parent, and then the taboo of talking about child abuse. And these were found common among all of the parents in the study. So they actually found out a lot from this study. One thing was that parents seemed to develop feelings of anger, frustration, and powerlessness when their child became uncooperative when they were trying to care for them, and that is likely to cause a parent to lash out against their child, especially if it's continuously happening. Another thing was that parents found themselves more and more responsible for things that professional would initially do for them. They felt like they were all on their own and they didn't have any help, and it really stressed them out even more. Another thing was that they feel like they didn't have enough information from professionals. They didn't feel like they knew enough about their child or about their situation, how to care for them, and that just increases their stress even more. Also, it seemed that parents were uncomfortable sharing their emotional conflicts. They weren't comfortable with the vulnerability associated with sharing their emotional dissonances with dealing with their children. And so they just bottle up all those emotional stresses instead for so long. And eventually those feelings are going to come out, and it's very possible that they're going to end up lashing out on their child because of it. Along those same lines, the taboo of talking about child abuse, they felt that it just wasn't okay to talk about abusing your own child to a professional or to anybody, so they just didn't say anything. And I feel like if they would just say something, they could get a lot of help, but instead they didn't, and they just bottled all those feelings up. However, a parent would seek support after they felt like they were going to become violent with their children. In other words, they would hold back their emotional dissonances for so long until it became too much and they had to let it out. I feel like it shouldn't have to get this far. I definitely think that we should make parents more comfortable in sharing with a professional and letting them know that it's okay. So the overall problem really lies in a lack of communication between professionals and the parents, a lack of parental education and assistance. So the possible solution I found, which is really the best one I found, was the Building on Family Strengths program. So the research method for this program, they performed a randomized clinical trial to determine if the Building on Family Strengths program would actually be beneficial to the parents. The participants were gathered by advertising flyers about the study in various centers such as like pediatric hospitals and schools, and this all took place in Western Washington. The participants were then randomly assigned to either the intervention group or the control group, and then surveys were administered to the parents. One survey was administered before the program began, and then another after the intervention was over 6 months later. So the surveys the parents were given. The parents had to rate themselves and their families according to the scales that were given in 5 areas. Those areas were self-efficacy, shared management between the parent and the child, parental coping, parental depression, and the overall family's quality of life. The Building on Family Strengths program. This was basically a class. The intervention group would meet once a week for about 2 hours each time for a 7-week period. The class curriculum consisted of various topics such as managing family life and stress, introducing concepts of self-efficacy and building those, shared management between the child and the parent, and how to put those into action. There was emotional dimensions of caring for a child with chronic health problem or disorder, how to manage difficult feelings. Another was child-directed interactions, and then the impact of in relationships and communication, how to deal with strained relationships, how to use communication techniques to build those relationships back up. Then there was also advice on how to find resources, conflict management, and how to approach the future. They use things like transition timelines with their child, which were really helpful. So they found out that this Building on Family Strengths program really did benefit the parents. Improvements were seen in all 5 areas that they initially looked at the beginning. And of course, these were all in the intervention group, and no improvements were seen in the control group as expected. The effect sizes ranged from about 6.6% improvements in parental coping to about 18.5% improvements in parental depression. And the greatest improvements were actually seen in those parents who scored initially in the lowest quartile. Their effect sizes actually ranged from about 12.1% improvements in coping to about 40.8% improvements in depression, which was amazing. So overall, my initial problem was that there's an increased risk of child abuse for children with chronic disabilities and health problems. Those arise mainly from just the increased parental stress and maybe difficulties just dealing with their child. And turns out the Building on Family Strengths program, which is a non-diagnosis specific as a whole, made a great impact on the parents, not only individually, but also on the families as a whole. The researchers did point out that in order to make the most effect and the best effect, to start with those parents who are in the greatest need first, who would have scored lowest initially, and then later move on to other parents as well. So that is my project. Thank you guys very much.